Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is our first panel called Characters and Focused, an author's perspective on character creation. And today we're joined by our three lovely guests, Leslie Hooton, Shreya Sakar, and Dr. Aparna Salvi Nagda. I hope you guys are excited for these set of questions that we've got prepared for everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And without further ado, let's get started with our first set of questions. So we're going to start off with our guest author, Dr. Aparna. Dr. Aparna, since we're focusing today on character creation, what is something that inspires you when you create new characters?
What inspires me to create new characters? First thing is that I don't look at creating novel or new characters. I focus on creating relatable characters. Okay, when a reader reads the book, they must feel, oh, she's like me or he's like me. And certain things that have been buried deep within our subconscious. If the characters of a book are able to speak, or if there is a struggle that one particular person is going through and the character of the book overcomes that struggle, I think that is the success of the book and the success of the story. So for me, it is creating relatable characters. It matters more over creating something out of the blue or new. Okay, because that is maybe the genre fantasy would deal with, but I write contemporary fiction. So for me, it is the reader must be able to identify with the struggles of the character. Okay, and when I say that my character is fat but does not, is fearless about being fat, she's okay with, so an aspect of body shaming is, covered, and people who do not have the courage to accept that, they feel motivated to, accept it. So that's where the motive of my story lies, so to empower people to accept their weaknesses. And yes, their strengths are already accepted and their strengths are already doing good job for them, but my character should resonate with the deeper feelings of the readers, and that's when I feel they will continue page after page, page after page, till the last page. So that is one thing I look at doing, relatable characters rather than having new characters. And these inspirations come from people around me, so my parents, my friends, even randomly a stranger who sits next to me on a metro train, and in a journey of half an hour, 1 hour, leaves a mark or impression me. I make down notes of those people there, the way they talk, the way they express their opinion, their body language. And from my ecosystem, from my surroundings, I keep gathering material for my characters, which I hope people have loved and liked in my novel called as The Labyrinth of Silence. Umar, I think I have been very specific and to the point.
Yeah, thank you. No, I appreciate it for sure. I think as a big reader, I love reading books that I can picture. Like you mentioned, you drew inspiration from the people around you, like your family. You draw people inspiration from when you're out and about in the city, when you're traveling, you meet all kinds of people. And I think that's definitely, I can definitely see that in the writing, and I can definitely see that in the books that I enjoy. I find myself like, oh my gosh, this character reminds me of my sister, or this character reminds me of one of my friends. I think being able to relate to these characters to the reader is important. And that's a great point that you brought up. Thank you for sharing that. Leslie Hooton, it is now your turn. What inspires you to create new characters?
I sort of agree with Aparna. I like relatable characters, and any story that I write begins with the character because the characters are going to be with me for a long time. And so they're people. So they just sort of show up, and I don't can't turn it on or off. For instance, like in The Secret of Rainy Days, my second book, um, the character Win showed up first, and she's not even the main character, but the line, her name was Win, and she did at everything her entire life. I thought that was a line that readers could relate to. They may have a friend that's a Win that wins at everything, or they may be a Win. And so I don't necessarily to define things by physical elements because I like the reader to kind of use their own imagination. And what I did with a character like Win is I proved the hypothesis true. Yes, she did win at most of the novel. And then at some point during the novel, which is true, it all flips on the head and she doesn't win. And how does she relate? And how does the main character relate to this? Because she was the one that put forth the hypothesis to begin with. So they're friends. And it creates sort of the tension and oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? And how is she going to deal with this? Is she going to just fall apart? So I too like the element of page turning because you want to see how this is resolved. So characters are my friends. I mean, first and foremost, they're my friends because they stay with me a long time, and I create them so I won't feel so alone. And then I put them in the world so the readers won't feel so alone, maybe. So.
Thank you, Leslie. I think you both bring up a great point about developing the characters that kind of relate to us as humans, whether it's like the characteristics or allowing us to have this vision where we can project, what we may think the characters might look like, how the characters are like. Thank you both for sharing. Now on to Shreya. I have a different question for you. What are some strategies that you use to ensure that each character has a distinct voice and role?
Hi, Omar. Thank you for the question. And I'm so privileged to be in the company of such good writers, sensitive writers. So thank you for this, opportunity. To answer your question, a lot depends on the book and the genre you're writing in. My book it does have this thriller mystery format. So in this case, the story defined a bit of how the characters are going to be. But what really aided me when I was trying to find this distinct voices for the characters is the mere fact that the 6 main characters, they come from different walks of life. They come from different socioeconomic background. They come from diverse professions, different regions of India. So all of them have this distinct backstory. And because their background stories are dissimilar, each of them have this unique individual voice and tone. And the strategy I used here is that, I try to stay in each of these characters for a while. I shadowed them. I just I did my research. I wrote up a lot of the backstories. Not everything finds space, of course, in the final manuscript, but it helped me to stay in that zone and to be that person, and also to understand the flaws in that character. There is something like, surface level details, how the person looks, how he walks, how she talks. And then there is this internal geography of how he or she thinks, what kind of problems he or she has experienced, how has he or she dealt with it. And the other strategy which I have used, it's very interesting. Aparna mentioned this train journey. I try to imagine what would happen if they start, if we just put all of them together in a bus ride and something happens to one of the other passengers. How would each of these 6 characters react? It was like an experiment, all of them would react according to what happened to them in their past. So there is this fusion of the past with the present, which I thought would be interesting. And that is how I tried to find a distinct voice for all the 6 characters. And I just made sure that each of them were there and they related to the problem that I have discussed in the book, but in different ways, in their unique ways. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but that was my take on these 6 different characters and how I made them distinct.
Thank you, Shreya, for sharing. There's definitely a lot of work that I can tell that you guys take on before creating these characters or imagining them in the worlds of your writing. So going on with this, Aparna, I have a question for you. I know that one of your main characters in the Labyrinth of Science, named Mookie, is unable to speak, cannot speak. What kind of research or what kind of information did you pull from to create this character?
could you please type my question? Your voice isn't
Yeah.
clear. Yeah, I'm so sorry for this, but
He just put it in the chat and I can read it out. He
yeah.
says, Aparna, one of your main characters, Mukhi, cannot speak. What kind of research did you have to do while creating this character?
Surabhi, your voice is clear to me, yes.
All right.
So my research basically goes beyond the character for the setting. Okay, I would always research for the place, the kind of climate, the geography. If there is a particular occupation that character is following, then more details about that occupation, how the people of that particular occupation work, talk, dress up. Okay, but the mental conditioning research is a little limited because that comes from my experience with people. So Muki was a character from my childhood, and I have researched least on her because I had to just dig out from my memory, ask my mother something about her because I was very small, about between 5 to 8 years when Muki disappeared from our life just like that. She used to come to our place to ask for alms, and she used to have morning tea with us, and then suddenly one day she just stopped coming to our place. So as Shreya mentioned, my imagination started from there. Where must have Muki gone? And more than research, it was my imagination which helped me to build this character. And Muki is a mute girl. So now what kind of research will I do to portray the emotions of a mute girl apart from just observing people who are physically disabled or who are unable to speak? So, but because I had already observed Muki, for the first 5 to 8 years of my life, I have seen this girl growing up in front of me. The way she used to talk, the way she used to express her emotions. Muki, was the least researched character. Yeah. So again, I say repeat is that my characters come by God's grace. They come up very effortlessly. Research is about the theme or the topic that I'm talking about, the conditions, the year in which the story is happening, what kind of socio-political conditions exist in that particular city or that country. If there is any kind of medical or any issue that I'm portraying it in the background, then that would require research. I think characters should come effortlessly, and research uh, for them, for me, is very limited.
Thanks, Aparna. That was really, really useful because I was wondering if there's any specific research that went in over there. So thank you for answering the question.
Thank you,
What was it that
Aparna.
you said last? What were you wondering?
I said I was wondering because it's a very different, I mean, she's very different and she's central to the story.
Yes,
So
yes.
I was curious about,
That is where authors, writing, some part of writing should come from your comfort zone. Because with debut novels venturing directly into unknown territories, I take very measured step with that. Maybe after 10 to 15 novels, you might find me on Mars. But with the debut novel, I took help of what my memory, what my people gave me. So comfort zone was there somewhere.
well, they say you write what you know, so you did good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I have another question for our next author, Leslie Hooton. When you write and you're working on multiple characters, what's something you do to help you balance the development of these multiple characters within the story?
Well, I want to piggyback on what Sarah said because I love the idea of shadowing a character and the internal geography of a character. In my debut novel, which is before anyone else, I was writing about a bartender and a famous chef. And neither one of those things I am or are connected to. So I sort of plunged into that. I really wanted to immerse myself into those worlds. So, which was kind of not a bad world because I was going to restaurants and sitting at the bar and asking them questions, and I would take a notebook like this and just just take reams and reams of research, and you're taking all this research on a chef and a bartender, maybe a doctor, but this was, I wanted to get it right, and I wanted people to feel like they were in the restaurant with Henry, who is the famous chef, but very temperamental, and the bartender, who is Griffin, who's very loosey goosey. And so I did want to establish a difference between them. They're best friends, but they are sort of different. And so with Griffin, his clothes, he doesn't tuck in his shirt, and he's sometimes has a 3-day stubble. He's not really concerned about his appearance. Henry, on the other hand, is a perfectionist, and he's always very buttoned up until he's not. And then we wonder what's going on that he's not so buttoned up, and then we find out later. So I allowed their physicality to inform them, and also to kind of give a little foreshadowing to the reader that with Henry, something may in fact be up with him, because he's not as buttoned up, and there was a time he was dissipated looking, and so they're all kind of curious. So I like to take physicalness and also just how they approach the world. I mean, a perfectionist, as most of you know, they are very sure about how they take on the world. A person that's more loosey-goosey and easygoing is going to take on the world in a very different way. And so I like that, especially when I was writing these two men that I'm not familiar with. And it was so much fun sort of diving into the restaurant scene and in Charlotte and in New York, because people talk to me. And so I found a lot of buttoned up kind of chefs, and I found a lot of loosey-goosey bartenders, and I tasted lots of good food, and unfortunately lots of good drinks. So I had to take a few for the team by taking Uber home, because I'd be on the bus with you, Prima, because I was like, oh, well, but it was sort of fun, because then I could infuse that. And it was during the pandemic, and so people wanted to read fun books. So that sort of proved to be a good thing. So
Thank you, Leslie. I love how you shared how you really immersed yourself into the research. I'm noticing a pattern between all of our authors here. Everyone's pulling from the research, from background information, from people that they know. And I think it's amazing that, you're able to create these distinct characters from, people you've interacted with, people you have form these relationships with, and all the research that goes into it. And now I have a question for our next author, Shreya. In your novel, Beneath the Veneer, your character, Rowney, is inspired by true events. Can you tell us a little bit about her and how you created this character?
Sure. Rani, in a way, is inspired by all the women athletes collectively in India, who face multiple challenges and barriers when they try to compete professionally. Now, very recently, we saw this news on Vinesh Fogart, the wrestler who was heckled and who lost out on a chance on winning the silver medal. And it was partly because of the internal politics in the sports federation. So, at every level, women athletes in India, they face discrimination, they face indignity, misogyny, and they have to maneuver the pride of people in power, which is very unfortunate, because all this time and effort they should have instead put into their talent, into their effort of performing well. But more specifically, Rani, the character of Rani, who is a sprinter, it's based partially on the life of Duti Chand, who is a professional sprinter who was barred. Again, even her story hit the headlines. She was barred from competing internationally due to the Athletic Federation's regulation that set a limit on, it's a technical term, it's the naturally occurring testosterone level for female athletes. So Chad's level was beyond the regular range because of no fault of hers. That is how God made her. But she was banned because of this regulation. And Duti Chad, she challenged the regulation, which led to this landmark court case, which shook the federation. But I wanted to show the private part of it, privately what she might have gone through. The indignity faced by this athlete who has, the newspapers have celebrated her. She was so famous, and the next moment, because of this no fault of hers, because of this small detail, she's pulled down. Her whole life, her character is picked apart, and it's this humiliation that women athletes face, perhaps in the whole world, in other countries as well, just to be good in what they're doing. So that was partly inspired, that inspired the character of Rani, and how this did not make her bitter, but it further made her more resilient and more protective towards her friends and her family. So that's the background of Rani's character.
Thank you for sharing. I'm going to post a brief article in the chat if anyone's interested in following up, learning about what happened with the case with Duty Chand.
Great, thank you so much.
Definitely an issue that I have heard about, and I think recently with the Olympics, there have been, claims, similar things have been going on. And it's very unfortunate that we have all these amazing, talented, high-profile athletes who are scrutinized and facing all these setbacks that don't allow them to do what they do best. Thank you, Shreya, for sharing. And, I really appreciate all this insight you guys have all been sharing with me. Now, I'm going to go back to Aparna, and I have one last question for everyone, and we're going to go in order.
So before I tell you why it is important for me to tell a story, I will tell you how my story looks. I'll just show you a glimpse of how my story looks from the outside and how it feels from inside. You need to read the book, which I'm sure kind people will do, and many of you have already done. So for me, it is very essential to tell a story because I believe that exchange of stories is something that is happening from the ancient times. Okay, knowledge has always been passed over from generation to generation in the form of stories. Okay, and emotions are better conveyed, a message is better conveyed in form of fiction, I feel. Okay, it's again my particular observation that if I tell a story to my students and my son, the absorption is much better than preaching it in a form of a written text or rules or regulations. But when I tell them a story, I tell them what happens if particular thing is not followed, and the consequences, the resolution of the story conveys my message very easily without being preaching. On a personal level, I'm full of stories. I feel I'm just full of stories. My friends say that is called as gossip, but I would say that I'm still full of stories. And when I release a story out, I feel that I'm giving out a part of me into the environment. I feel little lighter than what I was yesterday. So yes, telling stories is like a therapy to myself. Okay, and when I started realizing, I read a book more recently, Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. I would advise all the writers and in fact all people who deal with creativity to read this book because it tells you how you can be friends with your creativity, how you should punish yourself less for not putting up every day on the desk. Okay, there are days when you cannot turn up on the desk. Even if you turn up on your desk, there is nothing coherent or good enough that happens on it. So you have to be really forgiving to yourself so that your creativity is boosted. Yes, I think Surbi, Monica, and Mitra agree. So that is one book, and so telling a story is like a therapy to myself. It is the way I talk to people. And if you know me personally, somewhere in that story, I have left marks of myself. And I'm just a call away. So if you feel that reading my story has, somewhere resonated with you, you can just drop a message. That is all a writer earns for in their lives. So yes, for the sake of therapy, for the sake of conveying my message to my younger generation, and to remain immortal in some way, that's a little selfish, but that is how I am. So to remain immortal through your stories, the legacy of story, I feel, is the best legacy that can be left behind. And the last point why I have to tell my stories without boring you all much is that I love to immortalize my friends. So in one of, many of my stories, my friends, my blogs, they are a part of it. That is the way I can feel gratitude towards them, be grateful to them by being one of my positive characters in the story. So self-therapy, passing on my message, and immortalizing my friends. These are the three basic needs for which I tell story.
Thank you, Aparna. I definitely agree. Stories are, I mean, as a, working for a library, I love stories. I love reading all kinds of books. They definitely allow us to connect with everyone, not just our young readers or older readers. I think everyone benefits from engaging with storytelling, whether, when we're young, we get told fairy tales, folk tales, little stories, and then as we get older, we dive onto, more comprehensive written works of text. And yeah, I think you did bring up an amazing point that this allows us to preserve like a piece of history, allows us to preserve the bits that you guys write into these stories. These things are being preserved within the written works for generations to come. I have one last question for our next author. This is for Leslie Hooton. I wanted to note the contrast between some of your characters in your novels, especially between Bailey's first boyfriend, Griffin, and her brother. Oh, wait.
Okay, you just asked
I'm
me
sorry.
that,
I
Omar,
just
but
asked you
that's
that.
okay. I'll take the last question. That's it's great. I'm kind of prepared, Omar, for that one. Um, my mother is a librarian, and you alluded to it in my introduction that I had a stroke at birth, so I was sort of on the sidelines a lot. So I was in the library, and I realized early on that with my library card, it was like a passport, and I could go anywhere you could go, even though I was recovering from surgeries and things that maybe were not happy. I was in wheelchairs, but if I had a book, it would take me anywhere, to Kilimanjaro and Ernest Hemingway, or the Dust Bowl with Faulkner. So, or Steinbeck. So I Faulkner is one of my faves. But anyway, so I felt like I could not do a lot when I was a child. So, but my mother gave me a pen and she gave me a notebook. And I thought everybody did it, that I just wrote stories and these people came into my head. And Omar, I swear they saved my life. And I love the idea of it being therapy, because in a way I just didn't know. I didn't have the vocabulary or the life experiences to say, well, this is therapy. But in a way it was. And as I said, they saved me, and I just thought everybody did them. And my mother, being an English teacher, also read them and corrected them. And she said, Leslie, red ink is love. And, I would look at these stories that I'd written, and they would be all um, uh, just marked up. But she said, they're wonderful, but you've got a mixed metaphor here. So I learned all these little words, and phrases when I was young. And now when I'm going over these edits with my agent, I'm like, well, red ink is love, Sophie. And so I'm very aware, but I have to write so I don't feel so alone. And when things are out of control, like with my body or with the world, I sit down and I can write characters and I can control the ending, or I can, things bad might happen, but they're going to end happy. I always end happy or on an upbeat note. And so I needed to control something in my life when I was going through stuff like that. And the stories enabled me to do that. I could control the characters. And so they gave me purpose, and they made me feel that I wasn't alone. When I was alone on the sidelines in my wheelchair, I didn't feel so alone because I had all these little people with me. And yes, they were imaginary and whatever, but luckily my parents thought it was healthy and not, detrimental that I had people in my head. But I have needed those people throughout my life when life has not been when I've not had control. And so I've written all my life just so I don't feel alone and I need control. So kind of the same thing, but the characters are my best friends. They really are.
Thank you, Leslie. I can see that writing is very personal for everyone for different reasons. Thank you for sharing that. It definitely gives us a better perspective, kind of what motivates your writing, what kind of inspires your writing. Now, on to Shreya. Can you tell us why it's important for you to tell your stories?
Sure. No, that's the advantage of being in the company of sensitive writers. They do your job for you, The question has been answered marvelously by both of them. Aparna brought up the point that storytelling is therapy. I totally agree. There are so many pent-up feelings in us, so many opinions, so many dialogues in us. There are so many books in all of us. You feel lighter when you can share them. And also Leslie's point, you never feel alone. Vicarious living is, to the hilt. Even if you're alone, if you have some good books with you, you don't feel lonely. You feel in the company of good friends. And these friends are forever, right? I mean, you can carry them with you wherever you go, whatever you do. So great points. And I learned so much from both of you. But what I would like to add here is, again, it depends on what kind of writing you do. I write contemporary stories, and I wanted to bring out the societal problems that rattle people, that people don't want to talk about. What do you do about that? It is a dark place to go into, because I think, talking about all these, the dark places is not pleasant to either write or read. And people don't want to go there very often. But sometimes I feel that it is important to bring out those dark stories as well. And I tried to do that with this particular book, with my debut novel, Beneath the Veneer, which is kind of, it's not one of those cozy books. It is a dark story about what 6 women go through when they go to a new town near Delhi. They go in search of safety, but do they find it? What do they find instead? So I feel that, with few exceptions, women still exist, or women's stories still exist to further men's storylines, unfortunately. And whether it's a love interest, or whether it's this twinkly one-tone source of inspiration, or whether she's a victim who needs saving. But when it comes to telling real stories, stories of camaraderie, of resilience, and how they support each other, I so wish. And I know things are changing now. The arena is changing. There are more women writers writing women's stories, talking about all those emotions that they were always taught not to express. But I think it's a safe space now, and it's time that we talked about the problems and the dark things that we are afraid of, so that, again, we don't feel alone. So that we feel that it's not just me who's going through, it's not just my burden to bear. It has happened with other people, maybe in a different situation, maybe in a different timeline, but there are certain similarities, and that's the universal trait that one has to find in writing, which kind of unites everyone. That's why storytelling is important. Sometimes we feel ashamed to share certain parts of our lives or experiences that we have heard about, because we feel that's too personal. But what is personal in today's day? Everything has become open, it's public, so these things should be shared. Important and difficult topics like discrimination, like misogyny, should be shared openly, and I'm so glad that the arena has opened up for that kind of conversation.
Thank you, Sharon. That was beautifully said. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. You guys were amazing. I really appreciate all of the information our authors provided. I feel like I've gotten a glimpse behind the creative process. As an avid reader, I think I really appreciate knowing, how you guys pull from lived experiences, personal experiences. You create from the world, inspired by the world around you, inspired by your own experience. I think it's amazing. And I think there's a certain kind of liberty, freedom that we can see in writing where you guys, are just, you let your imagination run wild. You pull from these people that you pull from the research that you've done. I think it's a lot of work that you guys put into this, and I'm so glad that you guys were able to make it today. Thank you all.